Well, there's plenty of legislation out there making it more and more difficult to use the internet freely and certainly privately. Now, on an international scale, there's ACTA, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement. It was signed by 22 out of the 27 EU member states. But there is starting to be some pushback from the European Parliament, with a lot of people having a change of heart about actually ratifying it. Now, we also saw here in this country the how those blackouts online helped to kill SOPA, the Stop Online Piracy Act, and pipa, the Protect IP Act. But there is plenty more out there that poses a threat to online privacy and free internet. I want to bring in Greg Howe. She's associated with the online hacktivist group Anonymous. He's in Boston, Massachusetts. Greg, I guess let's start kind of specifically. Let's look at CISPA, the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act, and GOFA, the Global Online Freedom Act. CISPA seems to seek to regulate domestically, and GOFA, that seems to prevent businesses from here in the U.S. from cooperating with some of those more repressive governments. What's the breakdown, Greg, behind some of the complex wording here in these pieces of legislation?
Well, with CISPA, like you said, it's much more on an international scale, and it's much more for the law enforcement to utilize all this technology to spy on us, basically. Whereas GOFA is, I think actually a really important piece of legislation that will attempt to stop U.S.-based companies from spreading technologies that's used to inhibit people's human rights. And I think that's a very important piece to this whole puzzle. And the other big piece to GOFA that's really important is forcing all of these big internet companies actually display clearly to their users what type of information they gather and who they share it with.
There are a whole lot of people, though, who look at CISPA, for example, and they say, you know what, this is no different. This is SOPA 2.0. What do you think? I mean, is the government actually going to succeed in making a sequel to SOPA?
I don't think they are. I think just like with SOPA, the people are going to rise up, go to the streets. Just this weekend in Paris, there's going to be on Saturday another protest against ACTA, against SOPA, against all of this type of legislation. And, on June 9th, there's going to be a global set of protests against it. So I think right now the people are pretty committed to stopping this, and I think that'll shine through just like it did with the first round.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned sort of what's going on in other countries. I'm wondering if you even know this, but when you compare what some of our lawmakers here in the U.S. want to do, how does that compare? I mean, are there other countries where the lawmakers there say, you know what, everyone should just be left alone. They should be allowed to do whatever they want on the internet?
Germany has had a pretty good record of trying to protect users' privacy a lot more. When you look at various lawsuits against companies who have violated people's rights online or who have done things that are, against the public will, Germany's been one of those countries that's really fought for the people.
What about, I mean, you mentioned sort of the backlash against SOPA and pipa here in the U.S. and some of those online blackouts that really helped bring awareness to people who had no idea that there was any sort of legislation like this even in the works. But what about what comes next? I mean, is this something that people have already forgotten about, that this is not their #1 issue?
I think a lot of people have forgotten about it. And, the thing that needs to happen is the ones who haven't need to come up and get those people involved. And, all these big companies that stood up at one point need to stand back up. There is an actual group of companies, GNI, that includes people like Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, all these big companies that, WikiLeaks, or Wikipedia, I should say, and that actually came together for the blackout. And those people need to get, their resources back together and make it happen again. I mean, it was their support that really drew in the international press, which then got the general public.
Well, I've got to say, Greg, here in D.C. And really around the country, when you hear about this legislation, when you hear about this need to give the National Security Agency, the FBI, the government more power, it's always in the name of the same thing. It's always in the name of cybersecurity. A lot of people say, the internet is the future of terrorism. Is there a legit national security concern here, or, I mean, is this totally blown out of proportion? What do you think?
I think it's blown out of proportion. I mean, yes, there's a legit concern, but you have to balance that concern. Jan Malinowski of the Council of Europe said this perfectly, I think. Policy goals should not be used simply to protect outdated business models. And a lot of these laws they're trying to pass are doing just that. And they're using the fear tactic of, national security to convince the general public that these need to be passed.
Now, one of the faces of this movement, sort of on the other side, has become former Senator Chris Dodd. Chris Dodd, now the head, sort of lobbyist for the, or the head of the Motion Picture Association of America. He doesn't think that that SOPA is necessarily dead. He thinks that there's a possibility that in some other form it's going to come. What's the answer here? Because a lot of these movie companies and music companies, they do spend a whole lot of money to make their product, and when it's simply pirated so easily without any sort of consequences, they say, this is wrong. So is there a better way? Is there an answer that's not being explored yet?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got prime example right in front of you. I went to jail for copyright infringement. I was a pirate in the 90s. And the one thing that I've stated, even up till now, I'm a Netflix subscriber, I'm a Hulu Plus subscriber, I'm a Spotify subscriber. If you provide the materials in a format and via some kind of mechanism that is simple to use at a good price, people will pay. It's as simple as that. And instead of actually spending the time and effort on that, these old, outdated business models they're using the law. They're attempting to subvert our freedoms in ways that we're not going to allow, when what they really need to be focusing on is research and development and coming up with new methods to get our data to us. I mean, the biggest one is when you hear, the next studio that's decided to pull out of Netflix. Well, what's going to happen from that is people like me aren't going to be able to find your movies on the services that we pay for anymore, and we're going to turn to the only other way we have to get them, sitting in our chair at our house, which is piracy. It's up to them to provide us their material, their content, in ways we want to consume it at this point. It used to be that we just had to accept whatever they gave us. That's changed, and they need to update with the times.
I think that's a really important point. A lot of people just didn't want to see the internet kind of craze move as fast and as far as it has. But you're right. I mean, whether people like it or not, it's just going to continue to go in that direction. So they're going to have to think of ways. iTunes, of course, another example I think that you didn't mention. Just real quick, your prediction, Greg, for what you see as coming up next in terms of online privacy.
I see they're going to keep continuing to pass or try to pass ACTA, SOPA, TPP, and all these other wonderful laws. And I'm hoping that they don't get passed and that laws like GOFA do get passed, because, the Global Online Freedom Act is an important one. And I think the people will actually rise up to the streets again, just like they did last time, especially across Europe, which was just a huge amount of people. And we'll stop it.
And if nothing else, we know all these new fun acronyms in our head.
Yes.
Life in D.C. Greg Hausch, internet activist, also CEO of the local SEO company. Thanks so much.